The cleanest desk in the corporate maze always hides a dark truth, an illusion masking the ultimate empty void, a parasite disguised as a king. They glide through the hallways with aggressive speed. A hurried stride creates a psychological shield, deflecting suspicion of their inherent laziness, projecting an aura of absolute necessity. Observe the prop in their calculated grip, a steaming coffee cup held high like a sacred torch, a visual anchor demanding silent respect, proving they are running on fumes. This is the intricate hustle choreography, the physical manipulation of space to manufacture importance, while actual output remains staggeringly non-existent, buried under the theater of false urgency. Contrast this pristine theater with the bleeding martyr in the corner, drowning in chaotic stacks, their spine bending under the heavy weight, a silent sacrifice completely ignored by the architects. They perform the brutal, actual labor. But sweat has no currency when perception rules, and exhaustion is mistaken for sheer incompetence, a fatal flaw in the human psychological registry. The parasite never actually finishes the grueling race. They simply cross the finish line when cameras flash, stealing the breath of the real runners, absorbing the glory without suffering the agonizing miles. Time is merely an elaborate stage prop. They arrive early only to be seen arriving, leaving an empty jacket on the chair, a phantom presence haunting the corporate machinery. The blind system blindly rewards the spectacle. It measures the superficial velocity of a human body, completely failing to weigh the intellectual substance, blinding itself with the bright crimson illusion. Furious keystrokes echoing in the dead silent room, a sonic weapon deployed to intimidate weary peers, forcing the environment to acknowledge their burden. A masterpiece of auditory behavioral manipulation. Why carry the brutal stone when the weary can drag it? They feign overwhelming pressure, shifting the heavy chains onto broken shoulders, a vampiric extraction of human energy. One thrives by projecting an energetic lie. The other suffocates while bearing the brutal truth, drowning silently in a vast invisible ocean, bleeding out under the fluorescent execution lights. The crimson tie violently tightens around the collar. Every movement is a rehearsed act of dominance, meticulously designed to hack primitive cognitive biases, ensuring the parasite always floats to the top. The oblivious crowd watches the strings being pulled, unaware of the venom injecting the fragile culture, slowly paralyzing the very core of actual productivity. The busiest mask conceals the most hollow mind. The human brain possesses a fatal cognitive flaw, a deeply wired bias confusing visible struggle with actual value. We applaud the sweat while entirely ignoring the poison. If a mastersmith effortlessly forges a blade, and an amateur hammers aimlessly for an entire week, the blind system instinctively pays for the amateur's prolonged suffering. This is the effort heuristic in perpetual motion. The parasite weaponizes this psychological blind spot, deliberately stretching a mundane task to look like a grueling marathon, maximizing their optics. They understand that quiet efficiency is dangerous. To solve a problem instantly is to invite more problems, while feigning a brutal struggle guarantees sympathy and protective immunity, a brilliant defense mechanism. Watch the digital clock tick ominously past midnight. A strategically scheduled email drops silently into the inbox, deliberately timed to detonate at exactly 2 in the morning. A digital flare. The boss reads the timestamp and feels sheer awe. They mistake automated trickery for relentless dedication, rewarding a sleeping fraud while the honest worker is forgotten. A perfect heist. Time shifting is a predatory survival tactic. By manipulating the temporal perception of their peers, they establish absolute dominance without expending a single calorie. Pure efficiency of deception. The system actively measures presence instead of actual impact. A warm body merely occupying a leather chair is valued exponentially more than a brilliant mind working silently in the shadows. A metric of decay. To leave at 5 is considered a mortal sin. To stay until 8 doing absolutely nothing is celebrated as a heroic sacrifice for the corporate family. a cult of toxic presenteeism. Notice how the parasite leaves their monitor glowing. A massive spreadsheet filled with incomprehensible numbers, left perfectly open as a glowing monument to their fabricated struggle. A digital decoy. The real martyr stays and burns their retinas. They frantically process the data left behind by the ghost, their energy slowly siphoned away into the black void, a battery powering a dead machine. It is an ecosystem built on an optical illusion. The system demands a theatrical performance of suffering, and the parasite simply provides the best possible acting, reading lines from a stolen script. They do not sell their labor or their intellect. They sell the comforting aesthetic of a dedicated employee, a pristine package containing absolutely nothing inside, wrapped in a vivid crimson ribbon. The deeper you look, the colder the truth becomes. Efficiency is actively penalized by the blind architects, while the beautiful art of doing nothing is aggressively promoted, corrupting the foundation. Survival of the fittest has evolved into something darker, the survival of the most deceptively visible. Sound is a highly weaponized tool in the corporate jungle, a heavy sigh deployed to demand immediate attention, establishing fabricated suffering. The strategic sigh functions as an acoustic shield, forcing weary colleagues to ask about their burden. A brilliant trap. They amplify the perceived complexity of absolutely every minor task, using impenetrable jargon to paralyze the room, masking a simple truth. A 5-minute data entry chore becomes a monumental sacrifice, draining the collective organizational energy completely dry. A phantom heavy lifting. Observe the architecture of their deliberately convoluted vocabulary. A massive fortress of completely hollow buzzwords, designed to intimidate the innocent. The blind system praises their profound intellectual depth, completely failing to pierce the thick verbal smoke, rewarding absolute nothingness. Then comes the dark art of strategic incompetence, deliberately failing tasks with very spectacular clumsiness, ensuring permanent future immunity. If you break the office printer violently enough, they will never, ever ask for your help. A destructive but effective escape. The parasite pretends they cannot grasp the basic software interface, forcing the exhausted martyr to simply take over, securing precious free time. Helplessness is a highly refined predatory survival strategy, shifting the massive weight onto broken human shoulders. A quiet but deadly assassination. The genuine worker falls into the toxic empathy trap, sacrificing their own time to save the parasite, feeding the hungry ghost. It takes incredible calculating energy to act stupid, preserving their actual stamina for the bright spotlight. A brilliant energy conservation. They weaponize the patience of the truly competent employees, slowly grinding down the actual moral fabric, a silent psychological virus. The system creates an environment where failure is rewarded, punishing the reliable with endless, heavy, invisible burdens, fracturing the corporate core. Efficiency is a dangerous trap when competence guarantees a heavy life sentence. The most dangerous predators do not hunt. They patiently wait in the shadows until the brutal kill is entirely finished, stealing the fresh carcass. This is the dark art of credit hijacking, a highly calculated maneuver executing perfectly in the final 5% of any massive project, reaping maximum rewards. The martyr spends agonizing months building the foundation, breaking their back under the relentless crushing weight of endless raw data, shedding actual blood and sweat. Then the parasite dramatically kicks open the boardroom door, wielding a laser pointer like a holy sword of divine intellectual revelation, claiming absolute, total victory. Listen closely to their carefully weaponized pronoun selection. They use "we" when discussing catastrophic failures to distribute the heavy blame, a brilliant defensive shield. But when the sweet golden praise inevitably descends, the pronoun magically transforms into an "I" to absorb the entire spotlight, a flawless linguistic manipulation. They possess an uncanny supernatural ability to merely touch a finished document and instantly absorb all its inherent value, a vampiric intellectual transfer. The blind system is completely mesmerized by the pitch, valuing the sleek, glossy cover exponentially more than the agonizing internal mechanics, rewarding the loudest echo. In the chaotic arena of modern corporate warfare, doing the actual work is tragically a severe tactical disadvantage for survival. It drains your energy. The parasite conserves every single precious drop of stamina, reserving their entire life force exclusively for the final performative presentation, sparkling under the bright lights. The exhausted creator watches silently from the dark corner, their voice completely stolen by the charismatic thief standing boldly center stage. A silent, agonizing tragedy. Why bother planting the seeds and watering the dirt when you can simply walk into the garden and pluck the reddest apple? A parasite's ultimate logic. The invisible architecture of this deeply corrupted hierarchy actively promotes the sociopathic theft of genuine human intellectual property without any consequences. Institutionalized moral decay. True competence builds the massive, towering, heavy pyramid, while the hollow actor simply climbs up and plants their vivid flag, claiming the ancient monument. The loudest voice in the crowded room usually belongs to the most empty vessel. The ultimate defense mechanism of the corporate parasite is the theatrical display of profound suffering, a carefully rehearsed tragedy designed to manipulate human empathy. The fake martyr complex. By constantly vocalizing how overwhelmed they are with invisible tasks, they construct an impenetrable fortress of manufactured stress, repelling any new actual responsibilities. When a genuinely critical emergency inevitably arrives at their desk, they immediately deploy their rehearsed performance of total emotional collapse, forcing others to simply back away. The organization possesses a finite reservoir of collective human compassion, and the parasite greedily drinks it all before the truly exhausted can even speak, an emotional vampire. Watch them scatter physical documents frantically across their pristine desk, creating a chaotic visual masterpiece of an overwhelmed professional. A perfectly curated optical illusion. They loudly reject small tasks by citing their monumental invisible burdens, cleverly weaponizing the word capacity to build a permanent defensive wall, protecting their utter laziness. The true martyr sits in the dark corner, silently drowning in actual work, their authentic breaking point completely ignored because they lack the dramatic flair, penalized for their quiet resilience. The blind system naturally gravitates toward the loudest available frequency, interpreting the parasite's aggressive complaining as undeniable proof of deep dedication, a massive cognitive failure. Sympathy becomes a highly toxic currency within this broken ecosystem, freely given to the best actor while the reliable worker quietly starves. A deeply inverted morality. Whenever the spotlight of accountability threatens to expose their empty hands, they instinctively pull the emergency ripcord of sudden extreme burnout, deploying a thick smokescreen of victimhood. Colleagues who dare to question their invisible workload are instantly ostracized, branded as deeply insensitive to mental health by the master manipulator. A chilling psychological checkmate. They absorb all the protective policies meant for the truly broken, wrapping themselves in a warm blanket of corporate immunity and absolute safety, stealing the lifeboats. It is an exquisite paradox that demands intense intellectual observation. The person doing absolutely nothing is somehow always the most fiercely protected. The crown jewel of deception. The real tragedy is the slow death of the actual hard worker, bleeding out silently under the massive weight of the parasite's discarded responsibilities. A fatal transfer. The loudest cries for true help usually echo from the most empty and utterly uninjured vessels. A chilling truth. The corporate hierarchy operates under a profound, tragic delusion, a fundamental flaw measuring physical presence over true intellectual value. Blinded by the superficial metrics, the architect sitting at the towering apex of the pyramid desperately craves the comforting illusion of total absolute control. demanding an endless theatrical performance. They scan the vast open floor, seeking rapidly moving bodies, confusing a frantic kinetic energy with actual meaningful progress, completely failing the true test. A quiet mind solving a complex, massive architectural problem looks entirely identical to a lazy employee doing absolutely nothing. A terrifying optical paradox. The blind king demands highly visible sweat on the brow, forcing the brilliant strategist to actively pretend to struggle, downgrading the human intellect. Observe the massive glowing spreadsheet presented to the high command. Endless columns of utterly meaningless data blinding the desperate leadership. A numerical smokescreen. The leadership violently devours the beautiful hollow green charts, completely ignoring the rotting black foundation crumbling right beneath their feet. A toxic mathematical diet. The parasite understands this systemic vulnerability perfectly well, serving precisely cooked data to satisfy the endless corporate hunger, feeding the blind giant. They nod gracefully in the cold, stark boardroom meetings, repeating the boss's exact words to simulate profound strategic alignment. The perfect echo chamber. It is not a meritocracy built on actual hard work. It is a ruthless audition for the best possible actor. The stage is deeply rigged. When the hollow system continuously rewards the loudest performative display, it actively trains the entire workforce to abandon quiet efficiency, spreading the toxic virus. The genuinely competent workers realize their extreme effort is pointless, slowly packing their belongings and vanishing into the cold night. A fatal brain drain. They leave the massive, crumbling empire entirely to the actors, an ecosystem solely populated by parasites feeding on each other. The final collapse begins. The faceless king sits proudly atop a majestic golden throne, blissfully unaware that the royal castle is actively burning down, ruled by the shadows. A system actively measuring only the visible flesh will inevitably lose the silent, brilliant mind. A fatal mathematical error. The core of the parasite goes beyond mere laziness, a deeply rooted toxic psychological superiority complex, driving their every move. They gaze into the corporate mirror seeking endless validation, seeing only a perfectly flawless golden idol, worshipping their own reflection. Every single conversation is aggressively steered toward their achievements, designed to feed their massive, hungry ego, stealing the oxygen. They view their peers not as actual human beings, but as highly useful disposable stepping stones, climbing the bloody ladder. Empathy is entirely absent from their cold psychological profile, replaced by a convincing synthetic emotional mask, mimicking human connection. If a colleague shares a moment of genuine vulnerability, they immediately hijack the entire emotional narrative, recentering the spotlight. Notice how they never apologize for their destructive mistakes, shifting the blame with incredible manipulative precision, gaslighting the innocent. They rewrite historical facts to fit their heroic narrative, erasing the contributions of their weary peers. A dangerous, revisionist history. To challenge their fabricated reality is to invite destruction, triggering a vicious and calculated psychological retaliation, silencing the truth. Their grandiosity requires a constant stream of external validation, demanding endless applause for doing absolutely nothing. A bottomless black hole. They surround themselves exclusively with weak and compliant followers, building an impenetrable wall of loyal sycophants, securing their toxic throne. Any sign of independent competence is viewed as treason, a direct threat to their fabricated reality, demanding immediate elimination. The narcissist never actually builds anything of lasting value. They merely conquer and drain successful projects, a destructive locust swarm. When the drained host finally collapses under the pressure, they simply move to the next victim, feeling absolutely no remorse. The ultimate illusion of the deeply narcissistic corporate mind is believing their hollow reflection is real, a beautiful, empty lie. The most brilliant manipulators do not seek order. They actively engineer environments of pure, utter chaos, a perfect smokescreen. A disorganized system is highly beneficial for survival, hiding their glaring incompetence behind a thick veil, masking the deep void. They deliberately misplace crucial documents right before deadlines, forcing the entire team into a frantic panic, controlling the environment. When everyone is desperately scrambling to extinguish fires, nobody has the time to question the arsonist. The ultimate perfect crime. Observe them injecting toxic ambiguity into simple instructions, turning a straightforward task into a sprawling labyrinth, a calculated psychological trap. By intentionally withholding vital pieces of operational information, they manufacture a false sense of utter dependency, keeping their peers chained. They suddenly rush in to solve the manufactured crisis, playing the heroic savior for the blind audience, a theatrical rescue mission. The frantic physical movement creates a convincing illusion, tricking the leadership into rewarding the destructive behavior, a highly toxic loop. Genuine structural stability is a massive threat here, because peace always exposes the utterly useless parasites, demanding constant fabricated warfare. They fragment communication channels to avoid any accountability, scattering the undeniable truth across multiple confusing platforms. A digital, shattered mirror. The exhausted worker attempts to clean up the mess, burning their precious stamina fighting completely imaginary battles. A tragic, futile effort. Meanwhile, the manipulator safely rests in the shadows, watching the chaotic inferno with a subtle smile, enjoying the beautiful destruction. A toxic culture normalizes this endless reactive state, mistaking the continuous loud alarms for actual productivity, a profound institutional failure. The architecture of confusion is their greatest masterpiece, a fortress built entirely on panic and misdirection, impossible to finally breach. In a dark kingdom of manufactured falling ash, the quiet arsonist always wears the heaviest crown, an absolute cold truth. The prolonged exposure to this deeply toxic environment systematically destroys the resilient human spirit, a silent, invisible execution. They carry the crushing weight of multiple abandoned projects, sacrificing sanity for a totally broken system, a tragic, fatal loyalty. Sleep becomes an impossible luxury in their frantic reality, haunted by the shadows of endless deadlines, a waking psychological nightmare. The physical toll manifests in deeply hollowed, weary eyes, reflecting the harsh glow of midnight monitors, slowly burning away life. Every attempt to cry for genuine managerial assistance is suffocated by the parasite's loud theatrics, drowning in shallow waters. The true martyr begins to doubt their own competence, falling completely into the dark gaslighting pit, losing their mental anchor. They watch the arrogant thief receive endless public praise, while their massive contributions are entirely erased. An absolute crushing injustice. The human body is simply not designed for this, enduring constant stress without a single reward, pushing past the limit. Eventually, the delicate internal machinery simply snaps and breaks, bringing the once brilliant mind completely down. The final, inevitable crash. A perfectly clean desk belongs to the smiling sociopath, while the ambulance waits for honest creators. A brutal reality check. The blind system views this tragic collapse as weakness, failing to recognize the extreme parasitic drain, blaming the bleeding victim. They quickly replace the broken gear with fresh meat, feeding the insatiable hunger of the ecosystem, An endless, brutal cycle. The parasite smoothly transitions to the next available host, adjusting their tie without a single regret, calculating their next move. No monument is ever built for the quiet sufferer. Their agonizing sacrifice disappears into the void, erased from corporate memory. The heaviest price of playing by the ethical rules is becoming the foundation for another throne, a truly cold fate. A system that rewards the loudest voice will eventually silence every single brilliant mind. A guaranteed collapse. The parasite does not build the empire. They merely wear the stolen shiny crown, ruling the ashes. When physical presence becomes the ultimate metric, actual intellectual value is thrown entirely away. A tragic miscalculation. The pristine desk is not a triumph. It is a terrifying monument to nothingness. A beautifully empty stage. We applaud the heavy sweating brow today, completely ignoring the deadly poison dripping underneath. A fatal blindness. The honest worker bleeds in the dark, while the charming thief takes the spotlight. A rigged theater. Cultivating an environment of endless fake emergencies eventually burns the entire real fortress down, leaving only dust. Those who manipulate the complex social gears always outlast those who push the boulder. A cruel evolutionary truth. A culture addicted to the fake hustle inevitably massacres the quiet and efficient souls, bleeding out silently. The loudest complaints echo in the halls, while the heaviest burdens remain totally invisible. A broken scale. The sociopath gracefully dances through the wreckage, stepping over the crushed bones of creators without looking back. Survival in this dark corporate maze requires sacrificing your deep integrity for a mask, becoming the monster. The architects of the grand business illusion eventually trap themselves in their own nightmare, a poetic justice. The busy facade hides a decaying core, rotting the foundation until the building falls, an absolute certainty. The ultimate tragic truth of the system is that efficiency is actively penalized forever, while acting thrives.